Okay, good afternoon. My name is Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and the CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. Thank you all so much for being here for today's program. We're thrilled to welcome you all, and no doubt this is going to be a really exciting conversation about the future of technology hubs right here in Chicago. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce our head table guests. Please hold your applause until they have all been introduced. So first, we have Mark Anderson, Managing Director, Accenture, Abin Kyriakos, Director, Chicago Next, Ted Buell, Director of Analytics, Retail and Technology, Google, Wayne Bush, President, Financial Services, NTT Data, Amanda Lannert, Chief Executive Officer, Jellyvision, Julie Creamer, President, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Dan Ryan, President, Central Region, JLL, Robert Gabriel, Campus Director, University of Phoenix, Gary Gerstmann, Partner and Global Co-Leader of the Technology Industry Group at Sidley Austin, Michael Albers, Chicago Sales Director, American Airlines, Alex Bell, Global Client Director, Professional Services, LinkedIn, David Cohen, Vice President, North America, LinkedIn Talent Solutions, Andy Ahrens, Vice President, NTT Data, John Davidson, Chief Executive Officer, OCC, Mark Tebbe, Chairman, Chicago Next, Matt Moog, Founder, Power Reviews and Co-Founder, Built-In, Tonise Paul, Chairman, Energy BBDO, Tim Dwyer, Senior Vice President of Strategic Technology, OCC, Sagar Shah, Director of Carrier Operations, Uber Freight, and Nikhil Joshi, Vice President, NTT Data. Thank you so much for being here. You can take your seats. So over the last few years, we have all gotten to witness the varied and exciting ways in which Chicago is emerging as a new center for technology business to grow, evolve, and thrive in an increasingly competitive market. In October, we all had the chance to hear from local educational leaders in the tech sector, as well as from organizations that are investing time and resources in fostering tech talent in Chicago. Today's program, in partnership with Chicago Next, thank you for your partnership, allows us all to explore the next phases of how Chicago is changing as a tech hub. Our panel discussion this afternoon will allow us to hear from some of the most internationally recognized names like Google, LinkedIn, and Uber, and how they are working to create new homes here in Chicago. We will get answers to questions about what drew these organizations to Chicago, what they are noticing is different about the market here, and how they see the business landscape in Chicago changing over the years to come. We're thrilled to have Amanda Lannert, who is a key stakeholder in the tech sphere here in Chicago, moderating today's discussion for us. So please enjoy your lunch. In a few moments, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, Mark Anderson of Accenture will take the stage to introduce our speakers, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes or so.
Good afternoon. I'm excited to be here today with all of you. Sounds like everybody is having a great time over a meal. And let's continue that. My name is Mark Anderson, and I'm a managing director at Accenture here in Chicago. And I lead ecosystem-related market development within our technology practice. I work closely with technology platform partners who are changing the very nature of how business is done in the digital economy. And I'm excited to share that we've got some of them here today. Accenture has been a supporter of the Executives Club for over 20 years. During our partnership, we have sponsored or co-sponsored the Business Technology Forum with the mission of bringing business technology leaders together to discuss the retention of technology talent and trends to promote economic development in Chicago. At Accenture, we believe it's an exciting time to be in Chicago. Technology and innovation are enabling explosive growth. We've all been following as several tech giants have started to establish a footprint here in Chicago, and I believe this is only the beginning. Our panelists today are at the forefront of this technology-led growth, and will discuss the evolution of Chicago as the new tech hub. We will hear insights from Ted Burrell, Director of Analytics, Retail and Technology at Google, David Cohen, Vice President, North America LinkedIn Talent Services, or Solutions, I should say. Sagar Shah, Director of Carrier Operations with Uber Freight. And leading today's discussion is a titan of Chicago scene, a woman who needs no introduction, Amanda Lannert, Chief Executive Officer of Jellyvision. This group represents the push for urban growth to our city, a newfound attraction for skilled talent, and demonstrate the way technology and innovation are driving all industries from real estate to restaurants and beyond. We look forward to hearing their understanding of Chicago as a greater strategy for each of their teams and the growing interest in moving their initiatives to our city. Before we get started, I'd like to encourage you to participate in today's discussion through text messaging your questions to EXEC or text EXEC to 22333. That's 2 2s and 3 3s. So please join me and welcome Ted, David, Sagar, and Amanda.
Gentlemen, delighted to be here and to give a little bit of perspective of sort of the arc of today's conversation. We're going to start by getting perspectives from these titans of tech about the Chicago landscape. Then we're going to talk about the future of big tech, which is very well represented here. And then we're going to talk a little bit, sort of a deep dive about each of their respective companies and where they're going, where the hockey puck is going from their perspectives. So just to jump in, how would you, in a headline, each describe the Chicago tech ecosystem? Start with you. Thanks, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you all for coming in light of the chaos that's now ensuing the world. So I would say that Chicago is emerging as a tech hub. It's not a titan yet, and I think that Chicago has some real advantages, but also some disadvantages.
Hey everyone, Sagar Shah with Uber. I think it's one of the interesting things is it's a really interesting and positive blend of academia, government, and business. I think all three of these communities are actually working really well together with tons of academic institutions, top universities that can produce the talent. And I think where the city of Chicago, the mayor's office, and the governor's office have actually worked with institutions like 1871 to really foster tech and bring these businesses alive has been, I think, fostered a great community.
I would say it's evolving and growing. I think if you think about the role technology plays in Chicago, there's two things that are happening. One is the traditional tech companies that some of us that we represent are actually investing pretty heavily in the Chicago market, and that's exciting. And that's not just growing existing teams that are here, but actually adding parts of teams and companies here. And then if you look at the different industries, many of you that represent today, there are many different industries that need and rely on technology services. And so I think that there's a growing need there. So the combination between those two things are exciting, and I think it's growing.
Awesome. That's a great sort of segue to the next question. What I'd like to do is dive in now to each of your company's strategies in putting a presence in the Midwest. Were there vertical focus areas? Were there particular talent gaps you're trying to close? What was the intent by creating a presence in Chicago? And how has the town delivered and not based on those strategies? Let's start with Ted of Google, who is the great-great-great-great-grandson of a Civil War general. It's a great way to tee it up.
All right, great. We're investing a lot in the Chicago market, and I've been in Chicago in our Google office for almost 13 years, and so I've seen it go from a small regional sales hub with some engineering to evolve through acquisition with many other parts of the company. And even if you look in the last 18 months, some of the announcements and growth that we've had, the company is investing pretty explicitly in the Chicago market beyond just growing the sales team and beyond just growing the engineering team. So adding parts of the company like Google Cloud, our finance team, hardware, engineering. These are parts of the company that have traditionally existed on the West Coast or have been based in the West Coast. And as the company has looked at places to grow and to invest, Chicago has come across as a market where there's great talent. It's a community and a culture that I think welcomes technology with open arms. And so I think the Google office here and our commitment hasn't just grown by the sales teams growing, which many different cities have sales organizations. but rather like clear direction in terms of what the company is investing in to grow. Different parts of the company are what have traditionally been based in the West Coast to now have real big presences here.
Anything for Google uniquely hard or uniquely easy here?
I think for many of us, there's a lot of interest in tech right now. And for companies that have been traditionally based on the West Coast or different geographies, I think the fact that many of our companies are actually making these investments helps people looking to enter tech, whether depending on you're early in your career, middle of your career, later in your career. I think there's opportunities across the board.
Let's hear about Uber now. And just to say, Sagar is such a foodie that he was briefly on a Food Network episode that was Chicago-based. So I think he's basically famous. But why Uber Freight here?
Yeah, and I'll give a brief history of just Uber in Chicago as well. And Uber Freight has really been in existence and growing for the last 3 years. But Uber's really been here since around 2011, shortly after Uber as a company launched. And the original growth strategy for Uber was actually to have local teams in a lot of the markets in which we operated, which was, at the time, I think, quite unique for any tech company out of the Bay Area. And this is because the world we play in, the digital world, it's a messy world, and you need to meet individually with drivers to onboard them. We didn't have a lot of tools and best practices that we do now. And there are nuances of the city that you need to keep in mind as you develop the framework and the logistics backing that actually runs the Uber operations. So that was kind of the origination of Uber being in Chicago. And we had Uber in many other cities as well. But over time, we started actually piloting new businesses in Chicago. Chicago was one of the first cities in which we piloted Uber Eats. We actually started to build out a center of excellence here. We found tremendous legal talent here to build more legal teams. So we actually started really investing in this city. And Chicago was actually what we called at the time the central region hub for all of Uber, in which we had sort of East Coast, Central, and West Coast operations. So we actually invested a lot in the office over that time. Now rewind 3 years ago when we started building out Uber Freight, it was actually a really natural fit because Uber was already here. We had a lot of talent here that we could either move over to the Freight team or leverage. And then on top of that, there's actually a lot of logistics and trucking talent here as well. You see a lot of the larger freight brokerages and providers like C.H. Robinson, Coyote, Echo, et cetera, either based here or have very large offices here. And a lot of the innovation happening in the space is actually happening out of Chicago as well. So it made sense for all those reasons. And proud to say Chicago is now the hub for the Uber Freight business, which we're all really excited about. That's
great. And last but not least, David from LinkedIn, who managed to have 4 kids in 3 years. So he's tired. And he has boomeranged through his career out and back to Chicago no fewer than 6 times. So really interested in what is LinkedIn getting particular unique value out of Chicago, and where are there ways to improve? To give sort of the LinkedIn story and strategy.
Thanks for the call out on the kids. But to my wife's credit, it's 3 kids in 4 years rather than 4 kids.
Oh, 4 kids in 3 years. Yes. All right, just roll with it. Just roll with it.
Still really challenging, and she's still amazing. Yeah. So I'll give a little bit of the history as well of LinkedIn in Chicago. So the company was founded in 2005 in Mountain View, California, and in 2008 we had 3 U.S. offices. There was Mountain View, New York, and then we had a customer service center in Omaha, which we now still have. And the person who is actually in my role decided that he made a personal decision. He and his wife decided that they were going to move to Chicago and have their family here. And so he said, as long as we're at it, why don't we open up another office and we'll put it in Chicago. And so that was when the company was about 300 employees. Chicago became, like Uber, our central US headquarters, and really the kind of foundation for the South, for Canada, for a whole bunch of other places, because we realized that Chicago has some incredible assets, not only an incredible community of talent, but 2 major international airports, broad, diverse set of industries to sell and market into. And so we decided we were going to go bigger on Chicago. Over time, what we learned was the access that we had to talent, the talent brand in Chicago for LinkedIn was incredibly strong. And we found that we had advantages because a tech company in Chicago can attract a lot of non-tech talent to it, as opposed to a tech company in the West Coast who's competing with a bunch of other tech companies for the same type of talent. And so we found that over time, there's just a tremendous wealth of talent here. We also think that based on the diversity of Chicago and the diversity of talent, that we can bring some non-traditional folks into the office. And we continue to grow and invest, and this is going to continue to be our central US headquarters. The group is now up to 900 employees in Chicago. So that's up from 5 when I started about 11 years ago.
Oh, great. Real talk time. Let's talk about money. Let's talk about how do your companies pay Chicago workers in both cash and equity compared to the way you pay workers on the coast, and how have you seen it change? How do you expect it's going to change over the next 5 years? Is this a bargain town? Yes or no?
I would say that historically Chicago's been a bargain town when you compare it to New York, San Francisco, Seattle, and even some of the emerging tech hubs like Austin and Denver. I think that things are starting to balance out really across the United States. When you look at places like Detroit, for example, Detroit used to be the best deal in the United States. Detroit is now competitive with New York in terms of market rates for tech talent. And so I don't think that that's the story anymore. I think the story is no longer, hey, come to Chicago because this is a bargain town. I think the story is this is a great city from a tech landscape perspective, a talent perspective, and a central geographic perspective. There are a lot of advantages that we have in Chicago, but like being cheaper and finding cheaper people and cheaper real estate I don't think it's the story anymore.
Right.
I think there's a lot of things that have attracted our company's growth in Chicago, and a few things have been mentioned. The diversity of talent and the diversity of people actually is really important in terms of thinking about how do you want to evolve and how do you want to grow as a company. Chicago is actually really community-based. I was born and raised in Chicago in the suburbs, but it is a very community-based city, and that actually has a lot to do with how do we think about not only investing in our local market, but in terms of the products and services we offer, being able to operate in a city that really values those things too. So for Google, we opened our office in 2000 with just 2 salespeople. And we're up to over 1,200 people now across many different groups. And just in the last 4.5 years since we moved from River North to the West Loop, when we had 600 people, we've doubled, and that continues to grow.
What do you think holds Chicago back from having the global recognition that San Francisco or Boston or other communities may have?
I mean, those are very unique situations over a long number of years. So Silicon Valley, going back to the 60s and 70s. Even Boston with the universities, MIT and Harvard and others, and Seattle with Microsoft even back in the early 90s. So those are very unique. I think that I wouldn't get too hung up on how do we replicate that model, because I think it's really hard and it takes a long time to do it. But kind of what I alluded to earlier, I think Chicago has a unique opportunity in that there are many large businesses, many that are headquartered here across many different industries, that have tech as part of their business, but also can benefit from working with tech companies or even tech partners, many of which are in the room, to really grow the tech industry in Chicago. So I think about it less as trying to replicate sort of the next big tech mecca, and really how do we take who we are and what we have here today to be able to grow our tech presence. I think it's happening now, so I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, I think it's 2 things in my opinion. One is money, and one is getting VC investment in Chicago startups and Chicago entrepreneurs. And I think more specifically, some of these big name VCs that might come from the coast or from Silicon Valley, I think will definitely put a stamp on the emerging growth of strong entrepreneurship out of Chicago. And then the other is, I think the actual like industry expertise for particular industries. So for example, logistics has historically been a Chicago hub. I think right now we're actually going through this really exciting like revolution of logistics innovation, and you see Uber Freight and P44 and Forkites, a number of different companies actually building tech in this space. I know like payments and fintech has also been something historically strong in Chicago. So what are these actual emerging industries, and how can we center Chicago around those to really help create that name?
So you mentioned private sector, capital, labor. What would you, Sagar, say to Mayor Lightfoot? If you could get her ear and give her any advice about what would make Chicago more competitive for companies like Uber Freight to hang shingles here, what would you say? Yeah,
I would say, as I mentioned, more VC investment for the companies here so that they could take more of a risk, and I think have sort of the same opportunities that some of the startups on the coasts may have. And then the other is you mentioned a lot of the big businesses that have tech as part of them. How can we partner those businesses with some of the Chicago startups? So large companies like Walgreens, McDonald's, Motorola, who have large presences here, how can they also give back to the community and help foster that next wave of startups?
So David, getting back to the talent sector, what needs to happen to make talent flock here, stay here, build here, grow here? What kind of environment do we need to have to make this more of a hub that has scaling businesses in 10 years?
I think you got to start with getting the word out to the next generation of tech talent. So Chicago has a distinct luxury and benefit of being surrounded by some incredible engineering schools. When you think about University of Chicago, IIT, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, the list goes on and on. There's almost no other place in the country, if not the world, that has that concentration of engineering talent that's kind of like flooding out of the market. When you look at where that talent tends to go, it very often goes outside of Chicago first. The first wave of engineering talent is often going to Seattle, it's going to the Bay Area, it's going to New York, it's going to Austin. And what we need to do is sell the story of Chicago on why Chicago is a great tech city to students that are graduating right out of university for the first time. If we can get that story right, then I think we've got a very, very good chance of making sure that more of the tech congregation is happening around Chicago. We lose a ton of talent just organically to the coasts. So for example, for every 100 people in tech that move into Chicago, about 107 people move out of Chicago with tech skills, specifically software engineering backgrounds. What's interesting, though, is Chicago does get influxes from certain pockets, but none of those are in the United States. They're in the tech hubs of India. So, Bangalore and some of the other tech places in India, those are some of the biggest tech sources of talent to Chicago. So we've got, the opportunity of bringing in a lot more. We know we can do it. It's just a matter of making sure that we're doing it within our core kind of area, the Midwestern universities, where that are producing the majority of the United States tech talent.
So I'm going to come back to David to start the next question, but moving into big tech, we would be remiss to talk to this room and not talk about business impact of coronavirus. It's the first sort of marching line I've ever been in that actually involved a quick pump of hand sanitizer before we came to lunch. And yet this is a pretty full room. So whether or not we're handshaking, people are showing up. But if you look at Silicon Valley, there are a lot of offices that are now locking doors and requiring everyone to work from home, banning people from the outside from coming in to interviewing. I think that this room isn't really indicative of the mentality of coastal companies in terms of the risks of coronavirus. Would love anyone who's interested in talking about why is there a different ecosystem, at least of today, and what is going to be the impact ultimately on business, big tech, of this outbreak?
I think it's emblematic. Amanda and I were talking about this a little earlier. You see the cities that are kind of spiking with cases of COVID-19. I like to use COVID-19 because I'm a fan of the Corona Beer Company, and I think they're getting a bad rap right now. So the folks that are getting, the locations that are distinctly suffering right now from COVID-19 are those that look like they have a lot more international relationships. You look at, some of the international cities in northern Italy. Milan, et cetera, that are well connected to the Asian markets. You look at Iran, you look at the west coast of the United States, I think it's emblematic in some ways of how those relationships and the migration of talent and business relationships are kind of helping a disease enter the United States. So it's an interesting analog and one that I think we should watch very closely.
Yeah, I think so we have offices all around the world, right? And it's been quite interesting to see how this has changed over the last few weeks. And I think it is changing by the day. And we've been, our leadership team has built a very deep working group to actually think about the right policies, working with health experts to advise every step of the way. But thinking about our offices in Asia and Europe, and then kind of fast forwarding a week or two and now seeing what's kind of playing out in the West Coast, I'm not to say that that won't eventually come to Chicago either, right? And I think we are trying to take this one step at a time and do what's right for our employees and for our health, and making sure everybody's taking the right actions, but also not overreact and making sure that there's kind of widespread panic when it doesn't need to. I think Uber is also a unique company in that we are not just a group of only engineers. We have operations, sales, all different types of functions who ultimately do need to be on the front line. So having that balance of business continuity with ensuring safety of our employees and health of the community is something that we're working through.
Anything, 2 to 3% hit to GDP, any project?
No, I mean, I think what you read is that many tech companies, some of our companies, have big events, right, to showcase our products or to introduce new things. And so given that, just to be very pragmatic about things, that is, those are some of the things that you read about in terms of no longer doing big events that might be coming up. And so that's the first thing. And then I think it's very much a regional and city by city decision right now, kind of building on what David said.
Business Insider had a pretty big study recently that reported that the big keep getting bigger and the small are getting smaller. Depending very much on the next election, heavy-handed regulation of big tech could become part of the national agenda. What do your companies want the government and voters to know about big tech? Start with Ted.
I think as it relates to regulation, I think it's important in terms of building products and services in the right way to give consumers choice as it relates to privacy and other things. I think you have to be really, really careful with regulation because a change to big tech, what might look have one view, that actually has implications on down through the rest of the tech industry. So you mentioned smaller players as well. So a regulation that may affect a big tech company actually trickles all the way down. If we talk a little bit about startups in Chicago and what great ideas and innovation, that there is, in some cases, is the risk that actually hurts innovation and throttles that. So it's a really tricky topic, and I think as we talk about federal regulation, local regulation, the state of California is doing specific things around privacy. I think it's really important to understand not only what impact does it have on the big tech companies, but what effect will it have on the broader tech ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll leave regulation to Washington and have them obviously figure that and lead the way there. But I think there are a lot of good things that tech has done in terms of creating jobs, creating new opportunities, and changing communities. I think
solving problems,
What's that?
Solving problems. Tech has solved some problems every now and then.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've been on the forefront of that. If you just even look at the city of Chicago, and a large percentage of Uber trips happen within the south and west sides of Chicago, which are typically areas without much public transportation or access to transportation. So I think there's a lot of good. There's certainly things that tech can do better, and I think it's really about working with those local communities or working with those regulators to ensure that they're thinking of it at all angles and they are thinking about the greater purpose of what exactly we're solving for.
David.
So I think you got to take a step back and ask why regulation comes about in the first place. Regulation is generally a symptom of when an industry isn't doing the right things for itself. And so I think big tech has gotten itself in a place in a number of cases where by not doing the right things at the outset, regulation has become required. We are actually pro-regulation at LinkedIn. We think regulation's a good thing. I think part of that has to do with the fact that we're very proud of our record as being a very trusted technology company. We're often cited as being one of the most trusted websites and social media companies in the world. And so, if regulation is required to protect people and yet it doesn't hamper growth, then I think it's a wonderful thing. And I think we should be encouraging the right type of regulation. The best way it's going to happen is when we as tech companies, and especially in the big tech community, do the right things proactively and then partner with the regulators to figure out what the right answers are. If we're waiting for regulators to come about and enact laws that are going to protect citizens, then we're not doing our part to make sure that everybody is protected.
Thank you. Besides just growth, what else are on the broader agenda for each of your companies, in terms of social impact, sustainability? Like, what really are you putting muscle behind? Start with Google.
Sure. Sustainability, I would say sustainability and investment in local communities and markets. As it relates to sustainability, we've been carbon neutral since 2007. And over that time, and more recently, we've invested over $7 billion in clean tech. And that's not just buying credits, but it's actually investing in jobs and technology, wind turbines, solar technology, et cetera, so that we offset, as you think of all the data centers across the globe that Google requires for our services, that's a really important value to us. So we've made a big investment there, and that continues to be really critical to what we do. Just this past fall, we announced as part of the $7 billion, $2 billion in investments around the world on clean energy. That's a big one. And then in terms of investments in local markets, which is actually really relevant here to Chicago, I think our responsibility as a big tech company is actually to not just come and set up shop and hire great people and lift the local economy, but to actually give back and invest in the local economy. So we have a number of programs to do that. Grow with Google is a program that we work with small businesses and local communities to actually train and teach on technology and business and education. Our Google.org group has invested a lot locally here in Chicago. We recently did a $1 million investment for a local impact challenge to recognize 10 non-for-profits in terms of creating economic good locally. And there's a number of other things, including working with Chance the Rapper and his charitable organization to invest in over $1.5 million in local Chicago students to help them in arts and culture. So I think we look at it as a really important responsibility. It's something that's a value of ours, and I'm really excited to see the things specifically that we're doing, not just nationally and even across Illinois, but even very locally here in Chicago.
Yeah, I'm going to copy Ted here, but sustainability is another one that I'm super excited about. I think Uber is working on this in a number of different ways. If you look at the core transportation platform and integrating public transit into the app, the work that we're doing with bikes and scooters, all more green options to complement this suite of transportation. Really interesting. I'm actually most excited about what we're doing with Uber Freight, which is, so within trucking, actually 20% of miles driven are empty miles, and this is something I'm personally very passionate about. But just by better route optimization and actually connecting trucks with trips more efficiently so that you ensure every trip has a backhaul back to where the truck needs to be, you could actually reduce that by 35 to 40%. So purely just using better marketplace matching and the data science that we've been able to have at Uber and transferring that over to Freight, that actually ends up being something like 1% to 2% of US carbon emissions that we can bring down just by better, more efficient routing. And I think there's still a lot more that we can do on top of that to help with sustainability.
So Amanda, you asked the question, what are we doing in addition to growth to be responsible? We actually asked that question in reverse. What are we doing to be responsible and how do we pay for it with growth? The vision of LinkedIn is to create economic opportunity for every member of the global workforce. And that is what we are all charged with every single day. Every employee in the company, everywhere in the world, is to help connect and create opportunity for 650 million people who are LinkedIn members. Very recently, what we realized is that one of the easiest ways that we can do that is to bridge the network gap. We have something now that's called the +1 pledge. And the idea behind it is that if you've grown up in a good community, in a wealthy community, then you're three times more likely to get a job at graduation with a well-reputed company. If you go to the right university, you're 2 times more likely to get that job. And if your first job out of college is with a well-known company, you're another 2 times more likely to get that job with the right company. And so those are multiplicative. So 3 times 2 times 2 means that if you grew up in the right neighborhood, you went to the right university, and you got the right first job out of college, you are 12 times ahead of someone who had none of those things. And closing the network gap is about figuring out how people who come from better networked backgrounds are reaching out to those who don't have those same network opportunities and extending a hand to them, giving them an opportunity, making a referral, helping them find new economic opportunity. We believe that through 650 million members, if everyone does that one time, we are going to not only rapidly close the network gap and create massive economic opportunity for our members, but we're actually going to buoy the entire global workforce and with it exponentially change the way that world economies work. So that's at the heart of everything that we're doing. That's all we think about.
I'm sorry to let you dominate, but I'm going to jump in and do a deep dive on LinkedIn just about that. We are in the talent economy where people are bringing their whole selves to work, and there is more transparency from employers to employees, and certainly the nature and notion of the employer-employee relationship is changing. But as you sit there with those, reams and reams of data, what is work life going to look like? What is the employer-employee relationship going to look like? What is the talent economy going to look like in 5 years?
So it's changing rapidly, and I think zooming out, one thing to understand is that if you look at the way that the generations interact with their employers, things are changing pretty quickly. So I'm a Gen Xer, and when I got my first job with Accenture, which was a wonderful first job, I remember walking out of the office at the end of the day, getting into my car and going, thank God I didn't get fired. That was like my absolute reaction, and it wasn't because Accenture is a bad place to work. It was a wonderful place to work, and I wanted to keep that job. Now, somebody shows up late to work, and I go, hey, what took you so long to get here this morning? And they go, you're lucky I showed up today. And I think there's a generational kind of change that's going on right now where, this is not to be broadly kind of generalizing about millennials and Gen Z, but we're in a different sort of economy right now, where in the United States we're at a near 50-year low in unemployment. It is an all-time high in quit rates since the U.S. government started keeping track about 20 years ago. People basically have their choice. It used to be not that long ago that people were ghosting interviews. Now they're ghosting their first days of work. And to me, as a Gen Xer, that's like an absurdity. That's completely nuts. So what we're seeing is something that I believe is going to be dubbed the employee experience. So EX is the new UX for those of you techies out there. It used to be focused on user experience. Now we have to be focused on employee experience because the rules of the game are completely changing. What people are signing up for has to do with environmental responsibility, how ethical are the companies that they're joining, how mission-driven are they. Those are the types of companies that millennials and Gen Zs are saying that they want to be a part of. But they're also saying, I want to be a part of a company who is focused on diversity. And if you don't have a strong diversity program that you believe in, about half of job seekers right now are going to turn down your offer. That's how serious they are about it. And if you're not investing in their continuing education and skill development, a third of them are going to leave you within about 1.5 years. So the game has become focused not on how the employee works for the company, but how the company works for the employee. And I think this is only going to be exacerbated in the next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you. Sagar, let's talk about adaptive companies win. There has definitely been a fall from grace of growth at any cost, particularly behind WeWork. With the notion and expectations of unicorns perhaps shifting, what are the implications for Uber Freight? How have you had to adapt?
Yeah, I think with all of that going on, and Uber also having gone public last year, and a lot of IPOs happening last year, I think it's certainly an interesting time. Companies have had to adapt, and I think they've had to adapt to new strategies that they're setting for themselves, as well as to expectations of what the market might be asking for and might be valuing. For example, I mean, I think on our end, we've had to take a look at what makes sense from a business standpoint of what is our core competency and how do we work in specific industries that leverage those core competencies. So for example, like marketplace matching and making sure that the car is on the right route and going down the right one-way street, et cetera. A lot of that can be applied to Uber Freight, and that's where we've actually thought that there makes a lot of connection and sort of platform advantage of having those two businesses both within Uber. At the same time, we've also had to look at our competitiveness in certain markets and our ability to be successful there. And we've actually made acquisitions in certain areas, like in the Middle East with the Careem acquisition, and we've made divestitures in other areas, like in Eats India. So I think it's really pushing a lot of businesses to really think about what makes sense about their operations and where they have a competitive advantage.
So this one, partly crowdsourced for Ted. With so many cities growing to become strong tech ecosystems, what's going to distinguish leading tech cities in 10 years from the rest of the group? And where is Google, where is Google looking next?
I think it goes back to a little bit what I said earlier. As we think about growth, there's a lot that goes into that. Where is their talent? What characteristics of a city that you invest in match up with the values of the company? So I think there's a lot that goes into it. But I think specifically for us as we look at building and growing, it's really understanding the economics of where you're growing, but the type of people that you're getting. And I think the diversity that Chicago brings and the type of people, if you think about what we do, we build products for everyone to use globally. And in order to do that, in order to do it well, you actually need people from different backgrounds, different experiences, different viewpoints. And so, while all of our companies sort of started in a very small place on the West Coast, and as our companies mature, and you think about what we try to do in terms of building products globally for everyone, that's over 7 billion people in the world, you need to have offices and cultures and teams that are more representative of the world. And so I think Chicago does a good job of that, and that's why we've invested here.
So the next question is going to be, name a tech startup that not many people know about, but that you think are doing amazing things. Because I want you to dig deep and come up with really good ones that deserve a plug. I'm going to start with just a quick follow-up to Mr. Cohen. You mentioned more talent is leaving than coming to Chicago. What interesting strategies has LinkedIn found success with employing to attract and retain talent?
So one of the things that we're trying to do is, instead of going upstream against the tide, is to reskill people who come from other industries and beef up the overall tech community in Chicago. Chicago's tech community is growing really well. The number of people who have built software engineering skills over the last 3 years is up 65% in Chicago. So we know that there are good things happening in Chicago. But we have a program at LinkedIn that's called Project Unlock. And the idea behind Project Unlock is we take people who don't have traditional software sales backgrounds, and we teach them how to be software salespeople. And it's a wonderful program because it allows us to move from a very tight focus of one type of person with one type of background to literally an unlimited population of people who over the course of months can learn something completely different. And then once we kind of graduate them into the tech community, hopefully they're there to stay. So trying to do our part with Project Unlock.
Tech companies you want to plug? Maybe not heard of, but doing great things. We'll start with Ted.
I don't know if I have maybe one to pinpoint. What I pay attention to is in my role, we work with a lot of our big brands and big companies to help them market their products. And it's been interesting to watch over the last 5-10 years or so in terms of who else they are working with, and ultimately who we partner with as a services organization with them. I was talking to some folks from Accenture earlier, and we are now partnering with companies like Accenture and Nielsen and others, more in a partnership. And I think that's been a big change over the last few years. So that's kind of that's what I think most about.
Yeah, I don't have any specific ones to mention, but I think just a lot of the marketplace-driven companies that you see are just growing day by day, and I think you have businesses like Airbnb and Uber that started as digital marketplaces, but can actually be brought to other industries as well. I've seen a number in healthcare that helps connect, clinics that might need to do pharmaceutical research with actual drug companies out there, and how do you have an open marketplace to actually do that? I think that's what's really interesting to continue to both blend the digital component of that, of actually matching the two sides, but also the physical element of that, which means you need to be in the community, you need to know where those clinics are and which organizations to partner with in order for that to come to life.
Companies that I think of that are doing really cool things in Chicago in tech, I mean, there's so many that come to mind. I think that this is a really exciting time for Chicago. Cameo is one that jumps to mind because I think they're just such a fun technology and it feels so Chicago. The Cameo just feels like the right kind of tech company for Chicago. I love a company that I just met with recently called 5 to 9. The idea behind 5 to 9 is most people who work on diversity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives in their companies don't get credit for that work. And so is there a way that we can help them get credit and we can really blend that into our HR technology? The founder is a Chicagoan and she's amazing. And I think we're going to hear more about companies like hers.
Excellent, thank you. If you think about some great tech hubs, the collaboration, if not symbiotic relationship between the tech community and local universities is really key. It's Stanford and Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, MIT, and Boston. There are some very, very good universities in this town. What are your company's affiliations with them currently, and what do you wish they would be if they were to really help you grow and innovate more?
I can jump. I'm a Booth alum. I know you are as well. And we've partnered with them on a number of different initiatives. They have sort of a marketing initiative called, that's an immersion class that we can actually have students from the class be at Uber, kind of like an internship essentially, but actually do like a 3-month-long consulting work stream for us, go deep on the problem, meet with our actual users and customers, put together a recommendation. I think for me, it's really about, when I was in business school, I didn't think working at Uber was really an option. It was still a relatively small company, and I didn't really think about the actual business that operated on the back end. But just making sure that awareness is there, giving them insight into what those problems are and just how these organizations actually work, I think can then help match the right talent with the needs of the company.
I would build on that. I think one of our biggest challenges that we've spent a lot of time thinking about and acting on is just letting people know what it is, what jobs exist, what parts of the company exist in the local Chicago office. I think personally, I'm often surprised when I talk to students or graduate students or even others in the industry. They're like, wow, I know Google is in Chicago, but I didn't realize that was here. I didn't realize that you opened in finance, and I've been working in Chicago in the financial services industry for 15 years. So I think awareness is actually I guess sort of an easy one, but one that we need to do a lot better on. And then partnering with local universities to actually not only let those students know what jobs and what parts of the company are here, but to actually work with them to help them understand what does day-to-day work look like. Because again, you might assume that people know what the day-to-day looks like, but the reality is they don't. And if they don't, they're either often won't go for those roles, or you think about applying for them, and then that becomes an inherent challenge. So I think raising awareness and engaging the local universities in a way so that gets the students to understand what the opportunities are, so that they come and talk and apply and even visualize their career in tech.
Do any of you see the industry shifting away from contracted software engineering to salaried, more stable, benefit-eligible engineering? Question from the audience. So.
Moving away from
Do you see the industry
to
shifting
full-time.
away from contracted software engineers to the views block, to salaried, benefits eligible engineering? Is this a gig economy? Is it here to stay? Or in the shifting employer-employee landscape, are we going to have to really get married again to create the experiences that are going to keep talent working for you?
I think it's a really tricky question to answer. I'm struggling with it from a couple of perspectives. One is knowing that flexibility is becoming almost mandatory for large populations of the workforce. What that means from a full-time versus contracted perspective, I think, has yet to be defined. I think we're in the early days of trying to figure out, do people who want to have a lot more flexibility want part of that flexibility to be the way that they contract with their employer? Or do they want that flexibility to be part of a full-time set of responsibilities? And we have to work through a whole bunch of that sort of thing. I think what's going to end up happening is largely going to be the result of how employees decide they want to work with their employers. I think that because the employee experience is going to set the rules, whatever those rules become will be driven by what generally large populations of the workforce want. And so I think it's a little too early to answer the question. In large tech, there's a lot of both. There's a lot of contingent workforce, there's a lot of contractual workforce, and there's a lot of full-time work. And I don't think one or the other has become the future and what will kind of define where we're going to be in 5 years.
Yeah, we don't do a ton of contracting on the engineering and tech talent standpoint. What I do know is from all of the engineers that I work with, they want to know what the vision is, not 3 months down the line, but a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line of, hey, what am I actually building toward? And I think this is something that I think in general employees will gravitate toward, just to have that North Star and that world of a better place in mind, but also from an actual infrastructure and component and actually building the architecture, you want to know like what you're building today actually has downstream impact in terms of what it needs to look like 2 years from now. So it does seem like there's certainly interest from the talent standpoint to want to actually invest in the long term in the products that they themselves are building.
So for this next question, I'm going to give a little context. I've been in Chicago since 1994, but I'm not born and raised here. I chose it, and I'm a big believer in the city and the community and the cultural values. But I think from an outside perspective, the humility can be read as a lack of ambition. And so I would like each of you to sort of like represent your companies and say, what's your advice for Chicago business leaders who hope to build large, important, disruptive businesses like yours? Like, go for the jugular.
I'll try to avoid the cliches, but maybe I won't. I think you have to think big. I think you have to find what job you're actually doing for your customers, right? What problem you're solving, and go for it, and really focus on it. I think sometimes because technology, the good thing about technology is it can do a lot of different things, but I think if you don't focus and commit to something, you actually won't be able to get to where you're aiming for. And then I guess paradoxically, be willing to change your plans. I mean, the reality is in the technology industry and in tech, you can actually see what's working pretty quickly, routes included. And so sometimes you see a lot of people and companies committing to something and focusing on it, but having a hard time sort of flexing and abandoning that. So I would say be flexible and think quick about what's working and what's not.
So go big, be flexible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say find the right talent early. And I think with Chicago, there's a ton of talent out there. But I think the perception might be that the tech talent or the engineering talent, you have to go to the coast to get that. And I think taking that risk early on and really investing in your team early on and making sure that that is the right team, not settling, but also really looking deep into all the areas of opportunity to build that out is something that I would just encourage anybody to just take a chance on Chicago from the outset.
So I think Chicago's gotten a bad rap only because recently there hasn't been a blowout success story from a tech company that's founded in Chicago. You know, if you go back not that long ago, you had the likes of Groupon, a little bit further back, you've got CDW. There are some wonderful tech stories in this city. But we've had a drought. You know, there hasn't been a $1 billion exit in Chicago for a very long time. And so I think that's kind of conditioning people to think that this is a laid-back city and we're not serious about it. And the truth is that we are. And all you have to do is sit in this room and you realize how focused people are on making sure that Chicago wins from a tech perspective. But I'll just add to what Sagar mentioned earlier that, you know, building the right team and getting it right early, I think that's the hardest thing to do, but it's the most important thing to do. And in addition to just getting the right people on board, make sure that it is a diverse group of people that represent all different backgrounds, all different perspectives. Because if you get that wrong early, those people are going to hire other people who look and sound and talk like them, who are going to hire other people who look and sound and talk like them. And the next thing you know, you're digging yourself out of a massive hole. So if you can get the diversity and the high-level talent right out of the get-go, you're going to be so much better for it later on.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Final question. If you were going to write the definitive history of your respective companies in 20 years, what would the title be? Start with you, David.
So Reid Hoffman may hold this against me because this is his book to write, but I would say The End of the Network Gap is probably what we would call it.
I'm going to go with Setting the World in Motion. It's somewhat aligned with our mission statement, and I think Uber's transformed the way that we all travel and is now transforming the way that goods and things are traveling. And I think in 5-10 years, the vision's for all of that to be intertwined and connected.
I would say helping the world be more informed.
And buy all those books. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you so much. My name is Wayne Bush, and I'm the president of financial services at NTT Data, and I'm also a board member of the Executives Club of Chicago. On behalf of both NTT Data and the Executives Club, it's a privilege to be in a room like this one today. Not many organizations have the ability to bring together leaders from tech giants under one roof and such a candid conversation about the future of technology in Chicago, especially this one led by Amanda, who has such a vast knowledge of the Chicago landscape. As a global top 10 technology provider, we at NTT Data see the exact same demand for skills and talent in the Chicago market and look forward to bringing that to our clients as part of their IT modernization journeys. Perhaps more exciting is the ability for all of us here to connect and network with those in the Chicago business community at programs like this one today. These strategic connections, combined with the knowledge that we gained from hearing the detailed technical knowledge that we gained from this panel, allows us to have better opportunities to go back to our day-to-day jobs and pursue growth in our businesses in new and exciting ways. This is why we at NTT Data are so proud to be a sponsor of today's luncheon, and why as a member of the board, you may see me personally attending as many of these as possible with the Executives Club. There are a few exciting programs from the Executives Club that is hosting this spring that I want to call to your attention. On April 8th, Palantir Technologies co-founder and CEO Alex Karp will sit down with Wilfred Frost of CNBC's Closing Bell for a fireside conversation talking about Palantir behind the scenes. In addition, the Executives Club is also proud to present our International Executive of the Year award that we'll be presenting to Marilyn Hewson, Chairman, President, and CEO of Lockheed Martin on June 4th. We'll get to hear about Marilyn's impressive career with Lockheed Martin and how they are leading in global security and aerospace technologies. Lastly, if today's program has piqued your curiosity in other programs and business development opportunities provided by the Executives Club, I encourage you to check out the website and reach out to a member of the Executives Club to learn more about membership, sponsorship, and more. Once again, thank you to the Executives Club for this wonderful program. Another round of our applause, please, for our moderator and panelists. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you in the marketplace.